Hello, hello. Hello, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of Davos here in Switzerland. We had some amazing talks yesterday. We have some incredible speakers today, starting with my friend Hitesh, who runs GenAI at Google. So thank you for being here. I know we put this together at the last minute. I would love to hear about what you're working on and your thoughts about generative AI. I understand that he is not speaking on behalf of Google. He's speaking on behalf of himself, even though he has built some incredible technologies. And then afterwards, we're going to do a quick fireside chat and then open it up for questions from the audience as well. So without further ado, turning it over. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Brian. So my quick introduction. My name is Hitesh Wadhwa, and I'm an enterprise technology and business leader with Google Cloud based in Austin, Texas, where it doesn't get as cold as this. But incidentally, I don't know why, this time of the year, exactly, the weather in Austin, Texas is exactly the same. It's -7 degrees. One fine day, ChatGPT started the adoption of GenAI, and every other week, I think in 2023 was the year of AI, where we actually saw one or the other announcement coming through by one or the other top player. And I was like, it's so difficult to keep a track of it. And I went back, and I'm a pure play fundamentals guy. I was like, let me go back and understand, at a very deeper level, at a very simplistic level, what generative AI is. And can I explain it to like an 8-year-old? Can I explain it to, let's say, my dad, who's a 70-year-old, right? Before I jump to generative AI, let's take a step back and understand AI has been there for decades. It's not anything new. Of course, if I take example of Google implemented AI in their products back in the day in 2001 itself. When you actually had the spell correction in Google search, that was all AI. And they have been building on AI over the last 2 decades. What has changed now is the advent of the large language models, the foundation models. Generative AI is another form of AI where we are looking at generating content. It could be image, video, text, and whatnot. So if we, look at, and of course, if we go by studies like McKinsey, we're talking about Gen AI boosting the GDP, the global GDP by 7%, which actually amounts to $7 trillion. So you can actually see there's immense opportunity in Gen AI over the coming years, which simply means it's a good news for all of us. So what generative AI, I'm going to talk about the value chain at a very broad level. There are 6 levers to it, or maybe 6 layers to it. At the bottommost, we all see Bard as a very front-end application, or ChatGPT as a very front-end application. But let's see, what are the underpinning layers. At the very bottom layer, you have the computer hardware. We're talking about the GPUs and the TPUs, which is a market which is actually dominated by Google and NVIDIA. And then you have some of the accelerators which are actually built by Taiwan Semiconductor Company. So these are like the big players who are investing like tons of dollars into building that infrastructure, the computer hardware that we're talking about. Now, is that an opportunity for most of us? Of course not, because it requires a huge amount of capex. Unless you're a startup who's is able to get that funding done. It's totally your call, but I would see that a new entrant coming to the market is extremely rare. You have players like AMD, Intel also playing big on that front, but that market is extremely sort of dominated by, the players that I talked about. Layer 1 above, let's go above that, the computer hardware. Then talking about the cloud providers. Now, to access the GPUs and the TPUs, you need cloud. Today, any AI model is actually built on cloud. And of course, we know the top cloud providers. For me, it's Google, of course, but you go by the market share, it's AWS, and then you have Microsoft and Google, and you have others as well. Now, is that an area for new entrants to come through? Again, it's a very tough market because it requires huge amount of capex to build your own cloud infrastructure. So that's the second layer. The layer above is the foundation models. Where you actually have foundation models like GPT-3, 3.5. Google has announced Gemini. They have had Palm 2, Imagen, and whatnot. And Google has been building on those foundation models since probably 2015. And the T in GPT, which is actually the transformer, the transformer architecture, which is the underpinning technology that actually, powers any kind of foundation model, was actually pioneered by Google. So they are the pioneers when it comes to the transformer architecture. Now that's the foundation model layers. Of course, you have players like Anthropic and others coming up with their foundation models, and I think 2024 will be very interesting. We might have SLM, the small language models, and what have you, right? But that's an opportunity where some startups are trying to play big, but I would say it's a medium sort of opportunity when it comes to can a new player come in. Now, these are the three layers, and let's go one level up. Now it gets interesting. We're talking about the ML ops and the model hubs. Now, this is like the platform layer, which is where most of us could actually play, get our hands dirty with actually generative AI. I'm talking about platforms like Vertex AI, which is offered by Google, which is like a one-stop shop for all your generative AI needs. You can actually select any model amongst the 130 plus foundation models in the Vertex AI platform. I mean, even if you're like not a developer, you can actually, if you're a business owner, it's very simple. You can just pick the foundation model of your choice. And Google has done something very amazing out there. They don't just have the Google proprietary models. They also have models from third party like Anthropic. They also have models from open source like Llama. So the ML ops and the model hubs is an opportunity where companies are trying to bring up their own platforms and offering developers an opportunity to go create apps, go build, tune, deploy the models in that platform. You can actually fine tune those models through your proprietary data within the model hub and ML ops. So that's a great opportunity, I would say, for some of the new entrants. One level up is the application layer, and this by far, according to me, is the most promising one. Why? Because if you look at all the layers that I just talked about, application is where things get interesting because you're building something tangible, meaningful, something very promising for the customers. Let's take an example of a company called Harvey. It's a company which wanted to offer, easy to create legal documents. And when they were trying to create legal documents through a foundation model like GPT-3, the output was, not as great as when they actually fine-tune GPT-3 with the large legal data sets. So basically, they bought legal data sets, fine-tune the model, and build an application layer on it. So that's a company where you can just go create a legal document, and the output is way better than what a typical foundation model would offer. So again, if you're a company who's trying to get into the Gen AI space, think of what are the opportunities in the application layer which you can actually create, leverage some of the potential technologies that are out there. It's very easy. Get started with a platform, say like Vertex AI, start building, have the proprietary data, build an app on it. Now again, can everyone build an app? Probably not. You do need services. That's the topmost layer where the companies like Deloitte, McKinsey, and others are actually offering end-to-end offerings wherein you can actually create a Gen AI service for your large enterprise customers. So these are like the broad 6 layers which give you a perspective on where to play, who are the key players, what are they doing today. And interestingly, Google is across all the 6 layers. It plays along all. But I just want to give you a broad picture of what generative AI and what could be an opportunity for all of you. I hope that was helpful. How would you get started? Of course, I tell people, there are 3 ways to get started. Of course, every company starts with the use case. The way I break down use cases is in 2 ways. Think of value on one side. The y-axis is value. The x-axis is the cost, complexity, and risk. Lower the complexity, cost, and risk, lower the value, right? Now, and the higher the cost, complexity, and risk, higher the value. Now, depending on what kind of organization you are, depending on your risk appetite, your cost, and the complexity you want to play with, you got to pick depending on that use case. The bottommost could be where the complexity, cost, and risk is so low, you could just adopt some of the productivity tools out there, like Google Workspace. Say, okay, come on, do it AI, and you have the workspace. Boom, you already see employer productivity boost by like multiple percentages. That's like low-hanging fruits. The above layer is where you increase the cost and complexity and risk, but you derive more value. And that is where it becomes your true differentiator for your startup or for your organization, where you could say, hey, I'm going to launch a new contact center powered by generative AI. And that is what gives you competitive advantage against your competitors. And the topmost layer, where I say the cost and complexity and risk goes up and the value is mind-blowing, it's high, we're talking about some transformational initiatives. It could be launching a new product line, like something you've never done before. It's completely out of the box. The possibilities are endless. But of course, time to value in that scenario would also be very high. It could take you like 3 to 5 years to actually tangible see value out of it. So I hope that was helpful, just to give you some framework to understand how to get started, where to play, and where does the opportunity lie. Thank you.
Let's get into the fireside chat part of this. So one of the things people have been talking about quite a bit with generative AI is around who owns the underlying assets, right? So famously, the New York Times just recently, over the past, I believe, couple weeks, if I'm not mistaken, sued OpenAI because they used all of the New York Times's writings. There was conversation around Reddit potentially suing them as well, because ultimately, when OpenAI built their generative AI models in their ChatGPT, they built it off of content that was already created by other people. And so, what are your thoughts around what that actually looks like, around ownership, around if whether it's generative AI or LLMs being trained on data sets that other people created? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. If you look at the whole generative AI space, right, of course, if you look at any large language model, for example, it costs about like $10 to $20 million. Typically, like, for example, if I take an example of GPT-3, it costs them like roughly in that range, $10 to $20 million to really train the model. And training the model, in very simplistic terms, somebody asked me, a friend of mine who's not in tech, he's like, what the hell is foundation model? Everyone talks about large language model. What is it? Is it like a piece of software? What is it? Consider it like a zip file, which is actually crawled the entire internet. And you have compressed that file into one and put it on your desktop or your laptop. Like example, Llama particularly, which has 70 billion parameters, and each parameter is roughly 2 bytes. So we're talking about 70 GB into 2 bytes, which is 140 GB worth of a zip file, which has crawled the entire internet. It would have taken them like months, years, I don't know how much time. They've crawled the entire internet. They've gone through all tons of books, libraries. I don't know, again, it could be Wikipedia or Reddit, like New York Times we're talking about, right? It crawled the entire internet and compressed it into one file, along with a 500 line of code, which potentially could sit on your desktop, and you execute it, and that's your foundation or large language model.
Just said in an interview, it's basically one big CSV file.
Yeah. Now, where it comes in, because you really can't sort of open the file and say, hey, where the data came from. It's probably would be complex because it's all neural networks, right? And that's where I think companies like Google are taking a very careful stance of responsible AI. We have like very deeply embedded AI principles, because if you look at some of the core products from Google, right, whether it is search, Chrome, Gmail, they were not the first ones to get started on those products. They were probably late entrant to the market, but today they own that market, like in terms of the market share, simply because those products were carefully built with the right technology, with the right usage, taking care of, are we using the right data to build those products? So on that line, I think it's totally dependent on how each company is trying to carefully train their models, carefully making sure that you don't run into any kind of lawsuits, because it should be ethical in the first place and responsible. You don't want to use proprietary data ever. And since I talked about Vertex AI as a platform, right? If you're ever building an app, it's a one-way road, right? Your data could use the data from the foundation model, but it's the other way around is impossible. It's always a one-way road. It's sort of frozen. So Google will never ever use your proprietary data to train their foundation model. And that is, I think, the core essence where some companies are indeed failing today and struggling through lawsuits, but some really good players like Google are being very responsible.
Is Google going to incorporate their GenAI models right into search like Bing did? Or is that something that's going to happen and moving forward, or has it already happened and we just
It's already
noticed?
happened, yeah. If you go to google.com today, you make a search, you're already seeing, the search results that you get is actually our GenAI search. Like you practically, you could say, hey, I want to make a 7-day trip to London in January, with 2 kids, help me plan a trip. You're not going separately to BART. You can actually see that come up on google.com itself.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So if throwing our attention now moving forward, what do you think the next several years is going to look like from an AI perspective?
Yeah, I think 2023 was a very amazing start to the whole AI world. And 2020, according to me, even looks more promising, because I think one big thing that I see coming up in 2024 is it'll be the year of like multi-model, like Gemini, which is like Google's most capable model out there, right? It's all built multi-model grounds up. So you'll see multimodality in 2024 more, a lot more. Second, you might see AI coming on device. So there's a white paper written by Apple back in recently in December, essentially, and then you have products like Rabbit come up. So there's some really interesting stuff coming up. So which simply means you could have AI on devices. Could be on your eyeglass, eyewear, or it could be on your watch, on your phone. And that could be another good key trend. Small language models is another interesting trend that's being talked about. So I think 2024 would be more interesting as some of the big players, some of the new players come up with some interesting ideas, new interesting offerings. So yeah.
Very cool. Awesome. And one more question here before we turn it to questions for the audience. And this is a very self-serving question, but where do you think there are opportunities at the intersection of generative artificial intelligence and education and personalized education?
I should have talked about that as one of the big trends in 2024 as well. Convergence of platforms. I think the whole world is all focused on Gen AI or AI, not realizing there's a ton of value that will get created through convergence of platforms, like Gen AI plus robotics, Gen AI plus blockchain. There's some really fascinating, interesting use cases that potentially you could think of. And think of your electric vehicle, right? It's end of the day, it's nothing but a robot, right? Like a Tesla, for example. Add Gen AI on top of it, then your very interesting use cases pop up. In the education space, I think not an expert in the education side, but I know my niece who goes to UT Austin, she uses some of these tools really heavily to write assignments and other stuff. But I think these students are also getting smarter on incorporating how to use these technologies to their advantage. End of the day, the education will be not about what you know. It would be more about how to use some of the platforms, some of the tools, and what you create. So a lot of people are getting concerned about even like, hey, Gen AI is going to take away the jobs. And I tell them it's the jobs that are taken away will be converted into different kind of jobs. It's all about the mindset shift, right? Yes, a job of a receptionist, yes, will be taken away because AI machine could practically take appointments. You don't need a human to sit there. But essentially, a new job will get created. That will a human will need to really know how to use those tools. So same as in the education space, it's not about the knowledge; it's more about practical use of the knowledge using the AI tools.
Well, I'm glad you said that because so David Hansen from Hansen Robotics, Sophia, is here as well, and we were talking yesterday about the potential to use the humanoid robots along with our education AI algorithms and one of the generative AI platforms to create these humanoid robots that don't just sit there and talk to you randomly, but actually provide a one-on-one tutor experience where they can provide a significant amount of value from an educational standpoint. So maybe that's something we should talk offline.
Yeah.